moment, somewhere between the call to prayer echoing off Byzantine stone and the first sip of tsay poured from a tulip glass so thin you can see the color of the tea through the sides. When Türkiye stops being a concept and starts being a place. It happens differently for everyone. For some, it happens in Istanbul. He's standing on the Galata Bridge at dusk when the minarets are silhouetted against a sky going from gold to violet, and the fishermen are lined up on either side of the bridge in an unbroken row, and the Bosphorus below is doing something with the light that seems physically improbable. For others, it happens in Cappadocia, when the first hot air balloon lifts off before sunrise and the valleys below are still in darkness, and the fairy chimneys emerge from the mist in shapes that look less like geology and more like something a civilization dreamed into existence. Türkiye is the bridge that everyone talks about, and almost no one fully understands. Not a bridge in the metaphorical sense that travel writers reach for when they want something simple to say about a complicated country, but a bridge in the literal, to physical, geological, and civilizational sense. The land itself sits at the hinge point between two continents. The city of Istanbul is divided by a strait of water, and on one side is Europe and on the other is Asia, and you can take a ferry between them in 20 minutes, which is the most ordinary commute in the world to the people who do it every day, and the most extraordinary commute in the world to everyone who thinks about what it means. Türkiye has been the site of some of the most important events in human history. Troy was here. The first known monotheistic reform under the Hittites happened here. Christianity spread through the cities of Asia Minor, Ephesus, Antioch, Smyrna, cities that are now Turkish cities with Turkish names and Turkish populations, but whose role in the development of Western religion is written into every church in Europe. The Byzantine Empire ruled from Constantinople for over 1,000 years. The Ottoman Empire, which eventually swallowed Byzantium and expanded the capital into one of the greatest cities the world had ever seen, lasted until 1922, when it gave way to the modern Turkish Republic under Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. What emerged from that transformation is a country that carries the full weight of all of this, that wears it sometimes uneasily, sometimes proudly, and always with a complexity that resists the simple framings the outside world tends to prefer. The outside world tends to prefer simple framings. Türkiye is discussed in the Western press primarily through the lenses of geopolitics and religion, and EU membership negotiations that have been stalled so long they constitute a diplomatic category of their own. That coverage is not wrong exactly, but it is catastrophically incomplete in the way that all political coverage of complex countries is catastrophically incomplete. It leaves out the food, which is one of the world's great culinary traditions and is almost unknown in its full form outside the country. It leaves out the landscape, which ranges from the Aegean coast to the Black Sea Mountains to the volcanic plateau of Anatolia in ways that contain genuine superlatives. It leaves out the culture, the music, the literature, the hammam tradition, the tea houses, the bazaars. That gives daily life here a texture and richness that visitors encounter and find difficult to explain afterward to people who haven't been. So, let's start where any honest account of Türkiye has to start, which is at the water. There is no city in the world quite like Istanbul, and that is not hyperbole in the way that travel writing deploys hyperbole, which is casually and without consequence. It is a statement of geographical fact. Istanbul is the only city on Earth that sits on two continents. It is the only city whose skyline has been constructed layer by layer over nearly 3,000 years of continuous habitation, so that Byzantine churches and Ottoman mosques And Art Nouveau apartment buildings and glass towers exist simultaneously in the same view, each generation of builders working around what the previous generation left. And it is a city of 17 million people, and also a city of extraordinary human scale, of neighborhoods where everyone knows the baker and the tea man and the tailor, of small streets that haven't changed in 100 years, except that they now have Wi-Fi. The Hagia Sophia sits at the center of all of it, literally and metaphorically. It was built by the Byzantine Emperor Justinian in 537 CE as the greatest church in Christendom. And for nearly 1,000 years it was exactly that. A dome so large and so technically audacious that the architects who built the great cathedrals of medieval Europe measured themselves against it, and mostly fell short. The Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II converted it to a mosque after his conquest of Constantinople in 1453, adding the 4 minarets that now frame the building's exterior. Ataturk converted it to a museum in 1934. The Turkish government converted it back to a mosque in 2020. Whatever its current status, and the building itself is the same, a space of such immense interior volume and such particular quality of light, the golden mosaics picking up sunlight in ways that seem almost intentional about their effect, that standing inside it produces a physical sensation that has nothing to do with religion or politics. It simply does something to a person. Across a plaza from the Hagia Sophia stands the Sultan Ahmed Mosque, known almost universally as the Blue Mosque, for the 20,000 Iznik tiles that line its interior walls in cascades of blue and white floral patterns so detailed they require standing close to individual tiles to comprehend the scale of the work. The mosque was built between 1609 and 1616 by the architect Sedefkar Mehmed Aha, and it was controversial at the time because its 6 minarets matched the number at the mosque in Mecca, which was considered presumptuous. And the controversy was resolved by adding a 7th minaret to Mecca, which is the kind of solution that makes more sense in context than it does described abstractly. The Grand Bazaar, Cappadocia, is the oldest and largest covered market in the world, with over 4,000 shops in 60 covered streets, all of it under a vaulted roof that has been sheltering commerce since the 15th century. The statistics tell you almost nothing useful. What they don't tell you is the smell. Spices and leather and the particular mustiness of very old stone. Or the sound, which is a sustained hum of commerce in multiple languages. Or the way the interior feels like a city within a city, with its own logic of streets and neighborhoods and gathering places, so that the disorientation you experience in the first 10 minutes gives way, eventually, to something like comprehension, and then to something like ease. Across the Golden Horn from the Old City, in the neighborhood of Beyoğlu, is the Istanbul that the guidebooks sometimes call cosmopolitan, and means something both accurate and slightly insufficient by it. Istiklal Caddesi, the main pedestrian boulevard, is a 1.5 kilometers of 19th-century European-style buildings housing bookshops and record stores and clothing boutiques and patisseries and mayhanes, taverns that serve raki and mez, and go on until late. On Sunday afternoons it is so densely crowded that movement becomes a negotiation, a constant adjustment of bodies through bodies, in the specific way of streets that have been public gathering places long enough that the negotiation has become instinctual. The Galata Tower, built by the Genoese in 1348, rises above the neighborhood with a view of the entire city that confirms from above what the streets suggest at ground level: that Istanbul is not one thing, but many things existing simultaneously, and that this is precisely what makes it inexhaustible. Istanbul's relationship to water is fundamental to what the city is. The Bosphorus, the strait connecting the Black Sea to the Sea of Marmara, runs through the city's middle. And this is not a geographic detail, but a governing fact. The city was founded here because whoever controlled this strait controlled maritime trade between Europe and Asia, and that strategic position shaped everything that followed. The walls that Byzantium built, the fleet that the Ottomans assembled, the ferry routes that cross the water today between the European and Asian sides in a crossing so routine to commuters and so extraordinary to visitors that both reactions seem equally legitimate. The Asian side of Istanbul, Kadıköy, Üsküdar, Moda, is a different Istanbul from the tourist-dense historic peninsula, and it is arguably a more useful introduction to how the city actually functions as a place where people live. In Kadıköy Market is a covered produce market of the kind that exists in every Turkish city and in very few other countries. An indoor labyrinth of stalls selling vegetables so specific to their season that shopping here gives the agricultural calendar a direct connection to the table. The fish market attached to it sells whatever came in from the Bosphorus and the Sea of Marmara that morning, the varieties changing with the time of year, and the fishmongers calling out their stock in the specific competitive patter of Turkish market culture, which has more musicality and humor in it than most market cultures elsewhere. The Bosphorus shore on both sides is lined with yala, the Ottoman-era wooden waterfront mansions that were the summer residences of the city's wealthy families, painted in shades of cream and terracotta and green, their foundations sitting directly at the water's edge. Many are dilapidated now, some spectacularly so, are their wood darkened with age and their gardens gone to wilderness. Others have been restored to a state that looks impossibly beautiful from a ferry passing at water level. The ferry itself, the vapur, is the most democratic institution in Istanbul. For the price of a token, you share the water with everyone. Cappadocia leave Istanbul and go east into the center of Anatolia, into the interior plateau that few outsiders see. And eventually you reach a landscape that does not seem to belong to the same planet as everywhere else. Cappadocia is the product of a specific geological sequence. Volcanic eruptions millions of years ago deposited thick layers of ash that solidified into a soft rock called tuff, and then erosion carved that tuff into forms that geology textbooks call hoodoos, and that everyone who sees them calls fairy chimneys, because the term is more accurate. And the chimneys are columns of tuff topped with harder volcanic rock that resisted erosion, and they stand in valleys in clusters that range from dozens to thousands, in heights from a few meters to 60 meters, in colors from white to rust to gray to ochre, and in shapes that the human brain, which is constitutionally inclined to read shapes as meaningful, finds deeply and persistently suggestive. The region has been inhabited for millennia, and the rock, because it is soft enough to carve but hard enough to hold its shape, was used by successive civilizations as building material in the most literal sense. They carved their buildings directly into it. Early Christian communities fleeing persecution carved churches into the rock face, decorating the interiors with frescoes that survive in remarkable condition because the rock maintained a stable temperature and humidity. The Göreme Open Air Museum is a collection of these rock-carved churches from the 9th to 11th centuries. Their domed interiors painted in reds and blues and ochres with scenes from the Gospels and images of saints. The painting surprisingly vivid, given that it is 1,000 years old and exposed to tourism and time. The underground cities of Cappadocia are a separate marvel. Derinkuyu and Çamaklı are the most excavated, of more than 200 underground settlements in the region, carved downward into the earth rather than horizontally into cliff faces, descending through as many as 18 levels to depths of 85 meters, with ventilation shafts, wells, stables, churches, kitchens, and living spaces that could shelter up to 20,000 people at a time. Walking through them requires ducking through tunnels barely a meter high and emerging into chambers where the ceiling rises enough to stand upright, the progression feeling less like archaeology than like understanding the logic of a city built by people for whom the surface was dangerous and the rock was sanctuary. The hot air balloon experience above Cappadocia at dawn is, among all the experiences that tourism generates, one of the more genuinely extraordinary. The valley fills with balloons, sometimes 100 or more simultaneously, drifting at different heights above the chimneys. And the light at that hour is doing what early light in high country always does, which is making things look more than they are. The silence is what people who have done it remember most. At balloon altitude, with the burner not running, the only sound is the sound of the place itself, which in Cappadocia, at 6 in the morning, with that view, is something very close to nothing at all. Come west from the Anatolian interior, drop through the mountain ranges that run parallel to the coast, and reach the Aegean, where the light changes immediately and completely. Aegean light is different from the light of the interior plateau, softer, more refracted, filtered through sea air and the particular quality of atmosphere over a body of water that has been a center of human civilization for 4,000 years. On the hills are covered in olive groves, whose trees are so old they look like the original olive trees rather than descendants of anything. The towns sit on hills above small harbors, where fishing boats and gullets tie up in mixtures that suggest the continuity between ancient maritime culture and its contemporary version. Ephesus is the Aegean's most significant archaeological site, and it earns that distinction many times over. It was one of the largest cities of the ancient world. With a population of around 250,000 at its height during the Roman period, and what has been excavated, and it is estimated that less than 15% of the site has been uncovered, is of extraordinary completeness. The Library of Celsus, built in the 2nd century ICE as a mausoleum for the Roman consul Celsus, and later converted to a library, stands to its full facade height of 21 meters in a reconstruction that preserves the original arrangement of columns and niches. Walking up the marble main street, still marble, worn smooth by 2,000 years of feet, past the facades of temples and baths and public buildings to the Great Theater, which seated 25,000 people and still hosts concerts, produces a specific recalibration of historical scale. These were not small places. They were not primitive. They were cities, in every sense, and understanding that changes the story. Bodrum, further south along the coast, occupies a peninsula that juts into the Aegean in a way that gives the town a relationship to the sea on 3 sides. The Castle of St. Peter, built by the Knights Hospitaller in the early 15th century from the stones of the mausoleum at Halicarnassus, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, sits at the harbor entrance in a profile that has become the image of Bodrum for anyone who has seen a photograph of the place. The castle now houses the Museum of Underwater Archaeology, which contains artifacts recovered from Bronze Age and ancient shipwrecks in the Aegean, and which represents one of the world's finest collections of maritime archaeology. The idea that the stones of one of the ancient world's greatest monuments were repurposed into a medieval fortress that now houses evidence of the trading civilization that built the original monument is the kind of historical recursion that happens nowhere else with quite this density. And the gulet, the traditional wooden sailing vessel of the Turkish Aegean, is the instrument of a specific kind of travel that exists here and almost nowhere else. A gulet cruise along the coast, anchoring each night in bays accessible only by water, swimming off the back of the boat into water of such clarity that the bottom is visible at depth, eating meals prepared on board from whatever came off the boat or out of the market at the last port. This is travel stripped to what it actually is, which is movement through space in a state of attentiveness that ordinary life doesn't produce. The coast is simply the best backdrop imaginable for it. Inland from the Aegean coast, in the Denizli province, Pamukkale, Cotton Castle in Turkish, is a hillside that looks like nothing else in the natural world. Thermal springs emerge from the earth at temperatures around 35 degrees Celsius and flow down the hillside over limestone, depositing calcium carbonate as they go, building over thousands of years into a cascade of terraced white pools that look from a distance like snow and from up close like something designed rather than formed. The pools themselves are shallow, ankle to knee deep depending on the terrace, the water warm, the white rock underfoot smooth and slightly soft, the whole arrangement sitting above a valley in a landscape of red soil and olive groves, in a contrast that makes the white more extreme, the green more green, the red more red. Above the travertine terraces, the ancient city of Hierapolis was built by the Romans to take advantage of the thermal waters. And the ruins are extensive, a theater seating 15,000, a necropolis that is one of the largest ancient burial grounds in Anatolia, a colonnade street, and the antique pool, a thermal pool in which you can swim among ancient columns that fell into the water during earthquakes and have been lying on the bottom ever since. The experience of floating in warm thermal water with ancient Roman columns at various angles beneath you is one of those specific intersections of time that Turkey generates repeatedly and that most countries don't generate at all. The north coast of Türkiye is a Turkey that most visitors never reach, which means it is the country at its most unself-conscious. The Black Sea region, Karadeniz, is green in a way that seems improbable after the dry Aegean landscape. Heavy forests on steep mountain slopes that fall almost directly to the sea, cloud and mist and rain, a landscape that feels northern and contained rather than Mediterranean and open. The tea plantations of Rize are the source of virtually all of the say that Turkey drinks, which is to say that they are the source of the most socially central beverage in a country where drinking tea is the primary mechanism for all human interaction, from business negotiations to romantic introductions to the casual maintenance of neighborly relations. The terraced fields of small-leafed tea plants on steep hillsides in mist is a landscape that has the quality of the essential. Trabzon is the regional capital. It is a city with a history stretching back to Greek colonization in the 8th century BCE, which makes it one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities on the Black Sea. The Hagia Sophia of Trabzon, a different building from its Istanbul counterpart, is a 13th century Byzantine church whose frescoes were uncovered and restored after decades of use as a mosque, and which now functions again as a mosque. See its Byzantine frescoes and its Islamic function coexisting in the specific unresolved tension that characterizes so many Turkish historical spaces. An hour inland from Trabzon, the Sumala Monastery is carved into a cliff face at 1,200 meters in a valley of extraordinary forested beauty. built by Byzantine monks in the 4th century, expanded over 1,000 years, abandoned when the Greek Orthodox population was expelled in the 1923 population exchange. See, and now, a museum that receives pilgrims and tourists with equal ceremony. Go southeast from the Anatolian Plateau toward the Syrian border, and the landscape changes again. Drier, flatter, the sky larger, the light harsher, the architecture more influenced by the Arab world immediately south. This is the part of Turkey that gets least attention in travel coverage and contains some of the most significant things in the country. On Göbekli Tepe, near the city of Şanlıurfa, is an archaeological site that has fundamentally altered the story humanity tells about its own past. It is a complex of circular stone enclosures with T-shaped limestone pillars up to 6 meters high, carved with bas-relief animals, foxes, boars, ducks, spiders, vultures, and it was built approximately 12,000 years ago, making it the oldest known monumental architecture in the world, predating Stonehenge by 7,000 years and the construction of the first known cities by several thousand years. Its existence demands a rewriting of the timeline. Complex, monumental construction was happening before agriculture, before cities, before writing, before everything that the standard model of civilization treats as a prerequisite. Standing among the pillars, which are only partially excavated, and with the understanding that there is substantially more of the site below ground still waiting, produces a specific kind of vertigo that comes from the ground shifting under a story you thought you knew. Şanlıurfa itself, called Urfa locally, is a city of 500,000 people that is claimed by tradition as the birthplace of the prophet Abraham, a claim shared with several other sites in the region and impossible to verify, but deeply embedded in the city's identity and character. And the Pool of Abraham, the Balak Lagol, is a sacred pool of extraordinarily clear water, dense with carp that have been considered holy for centuries, and that no one has ever eaten. The pool is surrounded by Ottoman-era mosques and gardens, and is a gathering place for residents and pilgrims of several faiths. And the quality of life around it, the ease and the specific warmth of a place that takes its sacred nature seriously without being heavy about it, is representative of a culture of coexistence that the Southeast has practiced, imperfectly and in various configurations, for a very long time. Mardin is a city built on a ridge above the Mesopotamian plain, in a position that commands views of Syria and, on clear days, which are most days because the air is dry and vast, seems to command the entire flat ancient world to the south. The old city is built of honey-colored limestone in a style that reflects Syrian, Assyrian, and Arab architectural traditions rather than Ottoman or Byzantine ones, and the result is a townscape of unusual beauty and coherence. The same warm stone in houses and churches and mosques and khans, everything fitted to the ridge in a way that looks inevitable. The city has historically been home to Kurds, Arabs, Assyrian Christians, Armenians, and various other communities, and this diversity is preserved in its buildings. Assyrian churches of the 5th and 6th centuries, standing beside mosques of the 12th and beside 19th century Han caravanserais, in a concentration that makes the city feel more like a textbook than a town, except that it is very clearly and very functionally a town. Turkish cuisine is one of the world's great culinary traditions, a statement that needs to be made clearly because it is simultaneously widely acknowledged in theory and catastrophically underrepresented in practice. The version of Turkish food that the world knows from restaurants in London and New York and Berlin is mostly doner and kebab and baklava, and dishes that are real and good, but that represent a narrow and somewhat distorted sample of a tradition of extraordinary breadth and sophistication. The actual tradition has been shaped by the Ottoman imperial kitchen, which was cooking at a scale and level of refinement equal to any court cuisine in history, and by the regional traditions of Anatolia, the Black Sea coast, the Aegean, and the Southeast, which are as distinct from each other as the regional cuisines of Italy are distinct from each other, which is to say, genuinely, significantly, in ways that matter. Mise is the beginning, and possibly the essential thing. The collection of small plates, cold and hot, vegetable and seafood and meat, simple and complex, that arrives at a Turkish table before the main course is not an appetizer in the Western sense, and it is a way of eating that distributes pleasure across time and attention across the table, that requires sharing and conversation and a specific pace of the evening that is incompatible with hurry. A properly composed mise spread might include haydari, thick yogurt with garlic and dill, and esme, a finely chopped mixture of tomato and pepper, and herbs with a chili bite, and stuffed grape leaves and tarama, and fried mussels, and a dozen other things depending on the region and the season. Each small and distinct, the combination of them creating a meal that the main course supplements rather than anchors. The kebab tradition, properly understood, is a vast taxonomy rather than a single dish. In Adana, the Adana kebab is minced lamb mixed with fat tail and red pepper, and kneaded by hand until the mixture achieves a specific texture. Then pressed onto wide flat skewers and cooked over charcoal until charred on the outside and barely cooked at the center, are served on lavish bread with raw onion and sumac and parsley and a roasted pepper. In Gaziantep, the city that is the undisputed capital of Turkish gastronomy, the lamb is cooked differently, the spices are different, the tradition is different, and the result is different in ways that are not subtle. In Istanbul, the fish sandwich on the Galata Bridge, balık ekmek, a bread filled with grilled mackerel and onion and parsley, is one of those perfect street foods that makes you understand how a city's relationship to a body of water expresses itself in food. In the Black Sea region, the anchovy, hamsi, is treated with the reverence that the French reserve for truffles, appearing in soups and pilafs and pastries, and fried preparations so numerous that the region seems to have organized its cuisine around the presence of this small fish with the intense flavor. Gaziantep, Antep to its residents, deserves more extended attention than a passing mention in a survey of Turkish food. The city's culinary tradition is the product of its position at the meeting point of Turkish, Arab, and Kurdish cooking cultures, in its access to the specific pistachio grown in the surrounding region, and a level of culinary conservatism, meaning the preservation and continuation of traditional techniques against modernizing pressure. That is unusual even in a country where food tradition is generally well preserved. The baklava of Gaziantep is made with pistachios that are so fresh and so specific to their origin that the baklava produced there is considered definitively different from the baklava produced anywhere else. It and the city's baklavaçılar, baklava makers, are understood to be practicing an art rather than producing a product. Eating baklava in Gaziantep, bought from a bakery that has been making the same recipe since the Ottoman period, is one of those experiences of food as place that travel exists to provide. Tea, say, is the constant around which all of this organizes itself. Türkiye is the world's largest per capita consumer of tea, and the cultural weight of this fact is visible in every çay bahçesi, tea garden, and every kahvehan, coffee house, and every home and office and workshop in the country. Tea is served in tulip-shaped glasses without milk, in a double-stacked teapot that maintains the concentrate in the upper pot and hot water in the lower, allowing the drinker to adjust the strength by proportion. It is offered before any transaction, at the beginning of any conversation, as a gesture of hospitality so automatic it has ceased to require decision. Accepting tea is the correct response to being in Turkey. Refusing it is technically possible and socially puzzling in the way that declining to shake hands might be. Not offensive exactly, but requiring an explanation that is unlikely to satisfy. The hammam, the Turkish bath, is an institution so embedded in the culture that understanding it is understanding something essential about the relationship between public and private life in Ottoman and modern Turkish society. The great Ottoman hammams, Cemberlitaş Hamamı in Istanbul, built in 1584 by the architect Mimar Sinan for Sultan Selim II's wife, Tarihi Galatasaray Hamamı, are operating continuously since 1481, are architectural masterpieces as much as they are bathing establishments. The central chamber, the hararet, is a vaulted marble room lit by star-shaped glass oculi in the dome that throw filtered light onto the large central marble platform. The Göbek Taşı, the belly stone, where bathers lie to be washed and kneaded by the telak. The bath attendant in a massage that is more vigorous and more thorough than the word massage typically implies. At the experience of a proper hammam, the progression from the changing room to the warm room to the hot room, the scrubbing off of weeks of skin, the foam massage, the return to the changing room in a loose robe with a glass of tea, is one of those physical experiences that reorganizes priorities. The body feels different afterward in a way that is difficult to attribute to any single element of the process. It might be the heat, the water, the scrubbing, the stillness, the particular anonymity of being among strangers in a state of physical ease, or some combination of all of these. People who try it once tend to try it again. People who grow up with it tend to regard its absence from other cultures as a form of deprivation. Turkish music is multiple traditions operating simultaneously, with very little crossover and very little attempt to resolve the coexistence. Classical Ottoman music, makam music, is a modal system of great sophistication, organized around scales and rhythmic patterns that have no direct equivalents in Western music theory. Performed on instruments like the oud and the ney and the kanun in small ensembles for audiences who know the tradition well enough to respond to specific moments within compositions. Folk music from the Anatolian interior, played on the saz, the long-necked lute, carries the poetry tradition of the ak, the wandering bard, in forms that trace directly back to Central Asian origins and have remained vital through centuries of village culture. Contemporary Turkish pop and rock and electronic music are a separate world operating largely outside international visibility, but with its own stars and its own aesthetics. The Mevlevi Sema, the ceremony of the whirling dervishes, is the ritual of the Sufi order founded by the followers of Jalal ad-Din Rumi in Konya in the 13th century. And it is simultaneously one of the most recognizable images associated with Türkiye and one of the most misunderstood. The Sema is not a performance, though it is performed. It is a devotional practice in which the rotation of the body becomes a form of prayer. The turning dervishes, semazin, rotating on their left foot in a specific posture for the duration of a musical cycle that can last an hour or more. The music that accompanies it, ney flute and percussion and vocal, is specifically composed for the ceremony and has a quality that operates outside ordinary aesthetic categories. less beautiful in the decorative sense than truthful in some more fundamental sense. Watching a genuine Sema ceremony in Konya at the Mevlana Cultural Center is an experience that asks something of the observer: attention, patience, a willingness to receive rather than interpret, and rewards those qualities fully. Turkish bazaar culture is not a relic or a tourist attraction. It is a living commercial system with its own architecture, its own social codes, and its own logic that predates and in many ways prefigures modern retail. The covered bazaar, kapılar, is a form of organization in which merchants of the same trade cluster together in the same section, creating a neighborhood of carpets here, copper there, spices beyond that, jewelry at the center. The categories each having their own aesthetic and their own social atmosphere. The logic is that competition among similar merchants benefits customers, that proximity allows comparison, that the social fabric of a shared trade creates accountability and quality. Carpet shopping in Türkiye is its own education. The Turkish carpet tradition is regional and historical and stylistic in ways that take years to understand fully, but even a preliminary encounter with it, sitting in a carpet shop while the salesperson unrolls kilim after kilim from Konya, pile carpets from Heraki, tribal weavings from the southeast, explaining provenance and technique and the symbolic language of the patterns, gives you access to a visual culture of real depth. The carpets are not decorations, they are documents. The patterns record the cultural geography of the women who wove them. The dyes record what plants grew where and in what combinations. The structure records the technical tradition of a specific region. A carpet that a nomadic family wove for its own use 100 years ago and that ended up in a bazaar in Istanbul is a condensed archive of information about a way of life. And recognizing this transforms the shopping experience from commerce into something closer to scholarship. There is a pattern to how people respond to Türkiye after visiting for the first time. They become, almost without exception, people who talk about it. Not performatively, in the way that people talk about places that confirm their existing aesthetics, but in the way that people talk about places that surprised them at a level they weren't expecting, that showed them something about the world that their previous experience hadn't prepared them for. The surprise is usually not what they expected the surprise to be. They expected to be surprised by the monuments, and they were. But what they didn't expect was the tea. The spontaneous hospitality. The conversation with the carpet merchant that turned into an hour-long discussion of history and poetry and the particular meaning of the evil eye symbol that appears on the tiles in the courtyard, the sunset from the ferry on the Bosphorus, the silence above Cappadocia at balloon altitude, the baklava in Gaziantep that tasted exactly as it should taste and like nothing they had ever eaten. Türkiye is a country that has been living at the intersection of civilizations for so long that the intersection is not a tension or a problem, but simply a condition, the way the world is, the given from which everything else proceeds. The East-West framing, the one in the title, the one that every article about Türkiye eventually reaches for, is both true and insufficient. It is true that the country sits where the categories of East and West were largely invented, that it has been claimed by both and belongs fully to neither, that its history is the history of the border between worlds that were never as separate as the people on either side preferred. But the collision of the title is only half the story. The other half is the synthesis, the specific thing that emerges when two worlds have been in contact long enough that the contact itself becomes a culture. That culture is visible in the food, which is neither Arab nor European, but something that both traditions recognize as related to themselves and neither can claim. It is visible in the architecture. where Byzantine engineering and Ottoman aesthetics and Turkish vernacular building traditions exist in the same cities and sometimes the same buildings. It is visible in the music, where Central Asian instruments play modes that traveled through Persia and Arab culture before arriving in Anatolian soil and staying. It is visible in the people, who are simultaneously one of the most welcoming and most proud nationalities you will encounter in travel anywhere, who will feed you before you've finished introducing yourself, and who will argue with you about their history with an intensity that comes from caring about it, from knowing it, from being constituted by it in ways that go deeper than most people's relationship to their national past. The world has been misreading Türkiye in the same way it has been misreading most complex countries, reducing it to its political tensions, its geopolitical significance, its contested position in international alliances, its religion as a shorthand for something that shorthand cannot contain. The actual country, the Hagia Sophia, and the fairy chimneys and the gulet anchored in a bay that nobody else has found yet, the mez and the mackerel sandwich, and the baklava of Gaziantep, the hammam and the sema, and the tea garden at evening, when the fishermen come home and the city goes golden, and the call to prayer moves across the water from the European side to the Asian side in a sound that is beautiful whether or not it is yours, is available to anyone willing to come and look. The people who come and look return different, which is what the best travel is supposed to do. They return having eaten things that exist nowhere else in quite the same form. They return having stood in spaces where the accumulation of human history is not a museum exhibit but a living condition, where the Byzantine and the Ottoman and the modern are not stages of development but simultaneous presences. They return having been treated with a generosity that makes them question the assumptions they carried with them, about what the Islamic world is, about what the Middle East is, about what a country with this political reputation actually feels like from the inside, at street level, in the tea garden, at the table. East and West collide in Türkiye, yes. But what they produce in the collision is not a battle or a problem. It is a civilization. Come and see it for yourself.